Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
I'm Pete Wissinger.
And I'm Jamey Stegmaier.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today, obviously, we have a very special guest, friend of the pod, Jamey Stegmaier, is with us to talk about a topic that I'm very excited to do an episode on, which is cooperative games with limited communication. I wanted to have Jamey on because he is got a really massive cooperative game coming out this year in Vantage. And when I reached out to Jamey, he actually said that limited communication co-ops is one of his favorite mechanisms. So Jamey, thanks for joining us.
I'm so excited to talk about this today. Yeah, it was an instant yes to chat with you guys about limited communication cooperative games.
And so Vantage is coming out at the time of recording, right? If you're listening to this in the future, it is currently late April. And Jamey, we're looking at people getting a taste of Vantage around when?
Yeah, I've been working on Vantage for around 8 years now. And so I'm so excited that we're actually getting really, really close to letting other people actually play it. We're wrapping up manufacturing now. We're in like the final assembly process. We're trying to solve this tariff puzzle that we're faced with right now, but we're looking at getting it out in July of 2025. That's the target right now.
Well, just so you listeners know, we are going to dedicate some time at the end of this episode to talking specifically about Vantage, the sort of design challenges with Vantage, and how cooperation and communication played a role in the development of that game. I also want to say up front that if you have not voted in the Golden Geeks, we are officially nominated for Best Podcast. And so if you go to Board Game Geek and vote, it does a sort of ranking system of voting. We'd love to have your attention in the Best Podcast category. Jake, how many years have you guys been nominated for this?
This is our third nomination, so that's amazing. It's every single time we get nominated, it's truly humbling to see all the other great shows that that the Decision Space name is lined up next to. I'll always feel like we are spoiled in this hobby as board gamers for the number of dedicated, passionate people who are just making great board gaming shows for the fun of it. So to be nominated and counted among those and get this recognition, it just means a ton. So thank you all so much for nominating us. And yeah, please do consider making Decision Space one of your votes if you are going to vote this year in the Golden Geeks. And we can include a link to voting in the description of this podcast or on YouTube if you're watching it there. Hello, YouTube. And I just wanted to also make just one more quick plug for Jamey just very briefly mentioned tariffs. There's a lot to talk about there, a lot that's been said, and Jamey has made a couple of blog posts already on his page that has been really helpful in kind of understanding how tariffs are impacting the board game industry right now. So if it's okay with you, Jamey, I'd love to link your couple of posts recently about this for folks who are tuning in around the release of this episode. I think it's great information that people should really have if you're interested in the board game hobby enough to be listening to this podcast.
That sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Jake.
I joked before we started recording that Jamey, in dealing with our government, is dealing with his own limited communication puzzle when it comes to running a business right now. So, all right. Well, let's jump in and have a little bit of a discussion on communication and cooperative games.
And we should probably introduce our guest too. For those who don't know, Jamey is the CEO of Stonemaier Games, a big publisher in our hobby, known for great games like Viticulture, and Scythe from Jamey's own design, and then of course publishing evergreen classics like Wingspan, and now adding Tokaido to the repertoire, all kinds of
Yeah.
great stuff. So it's amazing to have you on, Jamey. Thanks so much for being here again and bringing kind of your insight and expertise to this conversation.
Yeah, it's a fun one, and we'll talk about the one game that we have so far, other than Vantage, that fits into this specific category. But for the most part, we publish competitive games. But I love to play cooperative games, so it's fun to come at it from this angle today.
Yeah, I want to actually start, Jamie, by asking you, like, how do you feel about cooperative games in general? Because I threw out on our Discord in a thread, hey, if anyone in here doesn't like co-op games, I'm just curious as to why. And there were a lot of responses of people who don't like cooperative games. So just wondering what generally, when it comes to your gaming, how do you feel about cooperative games?
I'm an omni gamer. I love competitive and cooperative games. And I think really I've had largely a very, very good experience with most of the cooperative games that I've played. I think the only rare negative experiences I've had have been related to, I think one of the things that you might mention from what people brought up, which is the quarterbacking or having an alpha player, someone who just tells everyone else what to do and you're left out of that decision space. And that's why I really love limited communication or limited information cooperative games. What were some of the other things that came up that people, yeah,
Yeah, I think a lot of people said that they feel like they're either too easy or too hard.
the difficulty?
Yeah, I was going to jump in on that because I am not. I'm an omni gamer as well, but I think I'm like 75% on like competitive games. That would probably be my ideal ratio. Would be like 75 or 80% of the time I'm playing a competitive game with a cooperative game in to mix it up. And I think the reason for that is that it feels like there's just less dynamic range of like of outcomes for the competition, right? When I'm playing a competitive game against people, they can do all kinds of wild and crazy stuff that I would never expect. Whereas maybe that's the case for your first couple times with a cooperative game, but eventually you kind of know what to expect as insofar as what you're up against in that game. So I think there can be for me a slight lack of kind of range from my opposition um, in cooperative games. So I kind of get behind that a little bit. It doesn't put me off cooperative games altogether, but I can sort of understand why a cooperative game could feel either too easy or too hard. And then once it's in one of those buckets, right, that's sort of what you're going to get every time you come to that game.
Yeah, I think that for me, I've always really liked cooperative games, and when people have said in the Discord, they were like, I like the interaction of competing against another player." I think that in a really good cooperative game, you're feeling that interaction by how you cooperate. Like cooperating with different people feels different if it is a game where
Mm-hmm.
there is some individual player agency in the cooperation. I think some cooperative games just feel like solo games where you're splitting up the work. Um, so I think that in a game with more dynamic cooperation, you can feel that kind of interaction and excitement, but it's not coming from your opponents. You know, the opponent being the game's puzzle perhaps is going to be static. But how you solve the puzzle cooperatively, ideally in a good one, is maybe what sets it apart.
Well, and one thing that I really enjoy about cooperative games in that way is that that competitive games don't offer is they allow cooperative games allow me to feel in sync with other people as like human beings. Like, oh, this person is thinking the same way that I'm thinking right now, or they're seeing me for something that I've created or a hint or clue that I've given, especially in limited communication. And competitive games, I don't really have that. Like, that is not a feature of competitive games to feel in sync with everyone else. And so I really appreciate that about cooperative games.
Yeah, there is something about throwing out something that you hope someone understands and feeling heard by that person, especially when you're sort of going out on a limb a little bit. Kind of like if you're playing something like Codenames, where you're like, I have an easy 2 clue, but I think I could stretch it to a 3 clue. And feeling someone who pick up on that, it just feels very satisfying.
And just to add a finer point onto the feeling of being in sync with your fellow players at a game, I think in competitive game, it's almost the exact opposite that you're often going for. Like you want to be the person zigging while everyone else is zagging. And that is not always, but often in a simple sort of heuristic for getting ahead in like a standard Euro game. If everybody's trying for one strategy and you're the only person doing the other thing, that's a great way to kind of get some extra value and an advantage in the game. So that's just made me think that's interesting where, yeah, you want to be in sync here, but you kind of want to desync in a competitive game.
So, Jamey, I want to throw to you. We talked about how one of the benefits of limited communication cooperative games is to avoid the problem you mentioned. We talked about having negative experience with cooperative games, which is quarterbacking. So I don't know if you could maybe explain what that term means to you and maybe give an example of a game or a time where you sort of like felt like quarterbacking could easily happen.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience with quarterbacking is when in certain cooperative games, typically the type where you're playing against the game. The game is actively trying to defeat the players, and we are trying to overcome the obstacles the game is presenting to us. Where one player is directing everyone, and even often has pretty close to the agency in the game to be able to direct all the other players because they have perfect information and they have the ability to at least talk over other people at the table. And the example that I chose for this, I chose two examples, Sleeping Gods and Forbidden Desert. And I chose these because I actually do love these games. I think we'll talk about maybe in a little bit the idea that players can choose to just not be quarterbacks or not be alpha players. We have the choice to do that. And so I love these games despite the ability, despite really the perfect information that's present in Sleeping Gods and Forbidden Desert. Forbidden Desert in particular is a really neat puzzle where you are it's in this line of games from Matt Leacock, like Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert, where you have these tiles that are shifting and adding sand, and you were trying to dig down under that sand to get to certain items and to find the location of different items to escape on a ship, and a ship that has crashed in the desert. And so all players have, I believe, it's completely perfect information. They have little asymmetric abilities, but perfect information, and it is possible. And I have had the games of Forbidden Desert where someone is just kind of telling everyone else what to do. I can even sometimes see that as an asset where if you're trying to teach the game to someone new or someone isn't feeling fully comfortable in a game, in that game environment, where you could help them by being an alpha player. But I think that quarterbacking is typically referring to when that is not a welcome invitation in the game.
Yeah, I actually just had a conversation with a colleague at work who found out I was into board games. Um, and he was saying like he has all these games but has trouble teaching the people, and he brought up Eon's End as like this kind of complex game that he'd love to teach to people. And I actually made that point to him where that's a great one to sort of introduce people as like a next step, because as long as you yourself know the rules really well, this is a cooperative Dominion style deck building game, you can just sort of say, okay, we're just going to start playing and I'll explain the rules as it goes and sort of coach people through their initial turns of the game, which I think is an amazing asset for a game that unfortunately the fact of that is can enable that quarterbacking. And I think the quarterbacking is especially pronounced in these type of Forbidden Desert or pandemic games where once you've played it a bunch, um, the complexity is low enough that somebody feels like they could really solve it. And once you're sitting in that position where you feel like I've actually know what to do here for sure, whether you're right or not, if you believe you know for sure, then it's tough because it can feel like I'm either sharing this information to people, or I'm just like sitting there like biting my hand while we're kind of throwing our game away by doing something that's not optimal. And that could be like, yes, you don't have to be an alpha player there, but if you're in that situation, it could sort of be like not fun either way.
So I'm going to be vulnerable right now, if that's
Love
allowed.
it.
And I'm going to
Yes.
admit, I have been that quarterback that Jake just described. So I have, because there is this idea that if you feel like you've solved it, right? Like we're down to our last maybe couple of turns and I know how we can do it. It feels like if our goal is to beat the game, then I should do that, right? I should kind of explain that this is at least a way that we could win this game. But it does feel weird and bad to essentially be telling other people what to do on their turns, because part of what's fun in playing a game is making decisions. And if someone else has made the optimal decision for you, that's just not a fun feeling. And so, like you said, Jake, I've been the person who's suggested, hey, here's how we win, because if we don't, we're just going to lose. And yeah, everyone got to take their turns, and that's great, but what are we doing here? And so I have to say that this is actually a reason why I prefer cooperative games with hidden information or limited communication, because it stops someone like me, who I think part of it is that I'm a teacher, and so I'm used to kind of helping guide people, whether they want it or not. So I know that this is a bad thing about me as a game player. So I prefer to not be given those tools. I would like you to take those tools away from me so that I can just enjoy the cooperation.
I
Thank you
appreciate you
for
admitting
this.
that, Pete.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, everyone. I that was huge. That was step 1 in the program, that I had to admit it. And so that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I think we'll talk about throughout this episode, we're going to quickly get into like limited communications. And I think one of the ways it shows up is just by simply being like a more complex game, right? Even if it's perfect information, the more complex the game system gets, the less quarterbacking, or people also refer to as alpha gamer, shows up, because it's less likely that people will feel like they absolutely have the solve for everything. Um, and anyway, um, I had a kind of an experience being like on a really bad end of a alpha gamer, and it was in a game called Concordia Venus, not a fully co-op game, but cooperative in the sense that you play on teams with somebody else. And I had just been, it was my first time playing it. It was at a con with people I didn't know at all, so it was kind of like already a fragile magic circle. And it turned out that the people I was playing with were like super gurus of this game, and my teammate was just like either telling me what I should be doing on every single time it was my turn, or just like head in hand shaking head of my decision I was making. It was like, it was truly one of the worst board game experience of my life, just being on kind of that like bad end of somebody alpha gamering me. So I bring that up as an example of two things, like both the fact that this is a much more complex game. So part of the reason it was feel bad was that like it was not certain, right? Like this person had a better idea, but it wasn't like a solved game state where it's like we just do this and this and then we win. And also to show that these type of what we're talking about in this episode doesn't inherently only show up in cooperative games. This could exist in other forms of game, competitive games that share that kind of like communicative element.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting because I know people who don't like team or limited communication cooperative games because they find them stressful. And that's because they feel like they are letting people down if they do something wrong. Um, I specifically know that apparently, I have not done this, but apparently it can be very stressful to play Hanabi on Board Game Arena, because apparently people are very intense about the correct way to give clues in Hanabi. And so if you're playing with highly competitive people and your understanding of the game's puzzle is lower than everyone else at the table, then that can actually maybe be an uncomfortable situation for you. Like, these games can be fragile if they're at uneven skill levels.
Yeah, and like if I lose a competitive game, I'm just losing for me. But if I do horrible, make big mistakes in a cooperative game, I could be messing it up for everyone at the table, which is a big difference from the feeling of like when I make a bad move in a competitive game and people cheer. They're like, "Yay, Jake just blundered big time," um, So I think that absolutely makes sense. I feel like I personally feel that way in some cooperative games. Like the Crew comes to mind as sort of like a more stressful cooperative game that I play where it's just like I knew I was the least experienced with trick taking at the table, so it's just like, come on, just don't mess this up. Like this time, it's going so well. Like surely I won't mess it up again for everyone. Yeah.
To segue a little bit into it, we're going to talk about the fun of these games in a second, but coincidentally, Jake and I played disc golf on the same partnership team yesterday, and I felt many of these same emotions there, where there were moments where I would have a great shot and I would feel like, yeah, I'm doing something for the team here. And there were moments where I would miss a putt and I felt like I'm literally letting down two people instead of just one in that circumstance. So, but the fun of that is that when maybe when Jake missed a drive and I happened to have a good drive right afterward, I really helped the team there. And Jake had many of those same moments.
Yeah, I had
So
many
that is
bad
makes it fun.
drives. So that is an amazing feeling where it's just like, you know what? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well,
So yeah, what does make these fun? Yeah,
I was going to say, let's shift to the positive. So, Jamey, why don't you give us something that is a reason that you like limited communication in games, and then give an example.
Yeah. And I have a lot of examples. It was really fun to think about this topic because there are lots of different types of games that use limited communication. It isn't always just the same type of game. And I really, the thing that stands out for me is when I am able to sync together with another person, when I see them for the way their mind works, when they see me for the way that my mind works. And one of these is, I'll use the mind as maybe my first example here. The mind is a very streamlined cooperative game where you're simply trying to play a higher number than the previous player, and that number needs to be in sequence with the other players. So if I have a 1, Pete has a 3, and Jake has a 99, we need to make sure that we play those cards in that order. The game starts out very easy with each player only having 1 card, and then you have 2 cards, and you have to do that again, the 3 cards. And I've had I have so much joy from playing the mind where we have those moments where we really sync with one another based on the timing and the flow of the game and getting those numbers in the right order. So that's the first of a couple examples that I want to talk about here in the fun column.
I want to jump in on that point, Jamey, because I agree with you. I think the feeling of understanding another person at a table and being understood yourself, to me, is the absolute best part of these limited communication games. And to take it to like a more esoteric place, as I am want to do on this podcast, I think this is an area where that has some of like the strongest agential or decisional theming, where like the decisions you're making in the game about how to communicate are exactly the same as what the game is asking you to do to like communicate something. And that is so, I think, just like something that is very accessible to people, easy to bring people into the hobby with, something that a wide swath of people who enjoy playing games or playing in general can find appealing, because that's just like what we do every day as people, right? We try to communicate with each other. I'm trying to talk to my colleague about, you know, a blog post we're working on, and like, can I get them to understand exactly what's in my head, and get into their head, and then we go out of the meeting, we're on the same page. Like that feels amazing, right? Like having a good you know, I have a young baby, right? And it's like all day, every day, he's just trying to communicate things about the world, and we're trying to like communicate things about the world to him, and having these like amazing light bulb moments where you can just like see something click both ways. I think at their very best, limited communication cooperative game can sort of mimic some of that experience and give it to you in a very distilled and like easily replicatable way, where you can actually have that experience. Like every time I put just one in front of somebody, like we're guaranteed to have some of these like connection experiences, because it's like, oh my god, we both put the same word, we thought about that the exact same way. How hilarious. It's guaranteed, and it's kind of like amazing and can really feel sort of magical and fulfilling in a way that I think is board gaming at its best.
Yeah, that's great. And it actually made me think, one thing I was going to say is, actually, obviously, communication is a mechanism in every game, but these are games that intentionally make you think about how you're communicating. And you mentioned a couple things there that made me think, Jake, that this sort of limited communication works very well in party games. And I think that's because it works well in party games because it feels really good when you feel heard. But I think at worst, it can feel funny if it's misunderstood, because that is still a form of miscommunication can be entertaining if it's in like a light game. If you're playing, Pandemic, it's maybe not hilarious for someone to do the wrong thing. But if you're playing, for example, something like um, Blob Party, which is a game that we've talked about. I know, Jamey, you're a big fan. And you two were both in a game of Blob Party at the Gamers Ranch that I played once, where there were a lot of people. And it would get down to where two people, and just so everyone knows, in this game, the way it works is you're going to flip out some clues and everyone's going to write a word on their board they think fulfills the clue. And your goal is to write the same thing as many other people as possible. And once you do, you form one blob that only submits one clue for the rest of the game. And the goal is eventually to have everyone in the same blob. And we played a game at the Gamers Ranch of this with, it had to have been at least a dozen people or more, and it got down to where there were like two people not in the blob, and they kept writing their own unique idea, which it was very funny to see how they think differently from everyone else. But also, we were having, I think, more fun failing in that game of Blob Party than we would have if we had all just written the same thing.
One other example of this too. I'm so glad you two brought up the idea of the fun and the funniness of these games coming from failure, not just success. And Jake, I like the just one example too of syncing with someone else, even though you are actively failing in just one when you are syncing with someone else. But a game that's quite different from these types of party games is the game's Mechs versus Minions, which is a programming game where you are individually programming what you want your mech to do, and then cooperatively trying to accomplish some goals. And some of the most fun and funny moments in that game come when you're programming, which is you are doing that without the other players seeing what you're doing. When you execute that program and the mechs go everywhere and it doesn't work out. That is one of the best parts of that game when that happens.
It's the funny moments that's like bringing to mind for me sort of like this idea of stupid games that philosopher CT Win, who we've had on this podcast before, talks about, where like these are games that it's only funny because people are like genuinely trying to succeed, and therefore it's funny when it inevitably gets messed up. Um, right, like the example of Twister or Mechs vs Minions is the same way. Like if you were intentionally just kept programming your bot so it would like go the wrong way on purpose, that joke would get old very fast, I imagine, for the people. But because everybody's you know, giving it their all to succeed at the mission, and then somebody messes up in some catastrophic way that causes like a bad chain of events, it's really funny. And I think cooperation is such a great opportunity for this kind of like just small misses in understanding each other to happen all the time. It's just like very fertile ground to foster those kind of funny but well-intentioned misses.
So I think another category that really works well here is games with a lot of hidden information, because it makes it so that quarterbacking really can't happen, because the only way that one person could alpha game everyone's turn is if they had all the same information as every other player. And so a lot of cooperative games will give players different information that other people don't have, which creates the need to communicate even more. But if they put limits on those communications, then that really deepens the experience. I think one example for me here would be a game like Gloomhaven. And so Gloomhaven is obviously a very successful dungeon crawling game. But I think that what set Gloomhaven apart from other dungeon crawling games that had come before is it has this really sharp card play system for how you take actions in the game. And so you're playing two cards and you're taking the top action off one card and the bottom on another card, and they have different speeds at which they go into effect. And you're not allowed to tell other players how fast you are going. You could kind of say, like, I'm going pretty fast or I'm going kind of slow, but you're not allowed to say, like, my number is this or whatever. Um, and I think that enables, or at least it requires maybe more trust in the other players, which to a certain extent, alpha gaming can feel like someone doesn't trust the other players. If you're playing something like Gloomhaven or something like Slay the Spire, which is where everyone has their own deck with its own special abilities, you kind of can't play other people's turns for them. You just kind of have to say like, "Hey, what can you do? Hey, what can you do?" Because I don't know what you can do, and that limits the perfect information. Is, I think, getting rid of, I mean, the perfect information is kind of a way to limit communication. It's not like I'm playing a solo game.
I particularly like when that limited information and communication is tied to the theme as well, when there's a good thematic explanation for it. Like in the game Shadows over Camelot, there might be a traitor among you, and so there's an active reason for there to be suspicion among all other players, and that's why you can't share perfect information. And then in Time Stories, one of my favorite cooperative games, one that has influenced Vantage quite a bit, in Time Stories, when you walk into a room with the other players or a place, you kind of divide up and go look at different things in that room. And it really feels like I'm walking over to that corner to look at something, because I can't show you all what I saw, and I can't just read off the card at what I'm seeing, because I'm over there and you're over here looking at something else. We then reconvene in the middle of the room, and Pete shares what he saw in his corner, and Jake says what he saw when he opened a chest, and I say what I saw on this bookshelf over here. And there's limits, because you're not actually just reading it or showing it to other players. There are limits to that. Limited. There's kind of inherently a limited communication and limited information based on what I choose to share or what I saw versus what I could have seen if I had inspected that bookshelf a little bit closer.
Yeah, that's such a good example. Time Stories. I've It's been a long time since I played it, um,
Yeah.
and I had such a fun first play with that game, and I think what's so cool about that mechanism in particular, let me just rephrase that, is just the idea that like it brings in the individual to the experience too, because different people are going to notice and recall different
Mhm.
elements of what they looked at, like what aspect of the picture, what aspect of the text, like what are the things that I find important or think is like most relevant to the case may not be the same as what you or Jamey or Pete would find, and that's likely the case for any individual. So I think that's cool too, which again makes it so that it's something that's like I am expressing myself. Am I being understood more so than like just a simple like game mechanism?
Yeah.
I think another thing I like about these games, and I can think of a lot of different examples of this, but one thing, my favorite things to do after playing a game is to talk about the game we just played. This is something I do with media in general. It drives my wife crazy. Like after we watch a movie, the main thing I want to do is just talk about the movie we just watched, and she's like, "Yeah, we just watched it." But I think that these limited communication co-op games create really like, I think it's fun when you talk about a game after you played it. 'Cause it's like, "Oh, when you did this, I thought maybe I should do this." And that sort of like post game recap discussion element is so fun. And I think that can really happen in, we've mentioned it a couple of times, but something like The Crew, where I'm like, "Oh my gosh, when I threw that card, I was trying to say this." And you're like, "Oh yeah, I totally missed that." Like
Mhm.
the talk between hands in a cooperative trick taking game like The Crew can really just enrich the social experience of the game night, I think.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I definitely agree, and I think it's similar to sort of what you were discussing earlier too about kind of like the stress of being sort of like knowledgeable or being an expert versus not, because yes, that's fun, and also like every time you talk about it, it's like, am I supposed to now know that every time Pete plays a 4 when like, that seems, a far cry from like what we had been doing previously. He's like, it like it ramps up, I think, the complexity in an interesting way too. So I like that, but I think especially in these games that have like a bunch of rounds, all of a sudden it can like start feeling more and more overwhelming.
Yeah, I think of a little bit of Hanabi in terms of a game that avoids that to a certain extent, because Hanabi provides specific rules for what type of communication you're allowed to give. And I believe it's been a little while since I played it, but I believe it is a roundless game. You're just kind of you're playing cards in a certain order until you win or lose, as I recall. And Hanabi, I think, is notable for this category too, because the limited information and there's limited communication as to what clue you can give to another player when you point out a card in their hand or the number of cards that they have a certain type in their hand. But it's also limited information in that you can't see your own hand. You are sharing the information with all other players about all other hands except for their own hand. I think that's a really, really neat twist on limited communication and information.
Yeah, I want to discuss this a little bit, and this is maybe not this is maybe getting away from like the fun of it a little bit, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about, which is that like I think a lot of times when a game is enforcing communication restrictions on you, like in The Crew, right? You're not allowed to communicate except for like in a very limited and specific way. Like I could tell you this is the only card I have of this color, or I could say like this is the highest card value I have in my hand, but that's really it. Or in even the mind, which the mind tells you like you cannot communicate in any way, shape, or form. You just have to read each other's mind. I think is like basically verbatim what it says in the rule book.
Mm.
And I know Hanabi's similar, though I'm not as experienced with that. However, it's like I think these rules are inherently like I love these games. So this is not a criticism of the game. Like the Mind is one of my favorite games, but I think like these rules are like it puts players in a gray area of cheating very early
Mm.
and often because it's like in the mind like you can't what's so funny and fun about the game is it sounds impossible but it's not because
Mm.
people are way better at communicating with each other subconsciously than we think we are. But of course, like that's kind of cheating, right? In a way, like
Mm.
if you're sort of like reading each other's like body cues, if you're like furrowing your brow at each other, like all these things are communicating, just not in the way we typically think about communicating with each other. Um, so I think that's interesting and could just create like a delicate magic circle in some ways. I don't know. Have you all experienced this with these type of games?
So a really great example of this is in partnership like card games, because people who play bridge together with the same person a lot, they know how to communicate without breaking the communication rules for bridge in a way that you've almost gotten rid of the communication limitation. I remember I one time played a 4-player game of Haggis with people who've played a lot of I'd never played 4-player Haggis, and it's a partnership game at that point. And my partner was like, "Hey, we're playing against a really good team. I'm going to send you some communication conventions because they have a whole language worked out." And he sent me this document that was like, "Okay, if you pass a card of this suit rotated 90 degrees, then that means I need you to pass me a card of the opposite suit." And it's just like, "Oh my gosh." At this point, I'm just I'm just doing stuff. Like it felt so insane to me, but I think that maybe is getting what you're talking about, Jake. Whereas like you you've gotten around the limitations to the point to where it doesn't feel like limitation
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. And I finally jumping in again because I finally remembered the point I was trying to make earlier, which was when you talked about Gloomhaven and you said like I'm moving pretty fast. You don't have to print out a sheet to give somebody to like to understand that after a few rounds that every time Pete says pretty fast, he means like initiative 4 to 6,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a pretty small range. And now all of a sudden it's like it just for me it can get into this gray area where it's like are we playing this game as intended or not.
Right. And one way I think the games work around this a little bit. There's the types of games where there's very little communication, and then after the game, like Pete said, after a movie, you get to talk about why you made all these choices. But there's also games where one person has a lot of information or no information, and all the other players have a lot of information or no information. They have the opposite, and so it gives the opportunity for. And what's an example of this? Let's see. Shipwreck Arcana is one where you're solving a little bit of a mathematical puzzle that other players are presenting. So Clover is another game like this as well, where there's actually quite a bit of communication at the table. Players are talking very openly because there is one player who can't talk or can't show the other players a key piece of information. And I think in general, I gravitate a little bit more to that type of limited communication game rather than the game saying you can't talk to your friends for the next 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, I want to talk about everything, even within this puzzle that the game has presented to me, given that this one person does or doesn't have that key information.
So maybe we could, just because I want to save some time for us to talk about Vantage. If anyone, if maybe we want to go around and say like 1 or 2 games that you wanted to talk about, we haven't talked about yet, and just say why you like the way this game handles limited communication. We can like whip around and then talk about Vantage.
That sounds great. I'll jump in first. And there's 2 games that I want to mention here for how they very elegantly handle limited communication, which is, and these are both team games. So they're like cooperative on your team. And one is Captain Sonar, and the other one is Guards of Atlantis 2. And there are other games that do this too, but they basically have, because you have this adversarial relationship with the people sitting across the uh, table from you, and you have hidden information on your side, like where your submarine is in the ship space. In the case of Captain Sonar, you know what card you're about to play next in Guards of Atlantis 2. It says you can openly communicate with your team as much as you want, so long as you're doing it within earshot of the other team. And I just think that's such an elegant way to force limited communication without giving any rule, aside from like you can't like text each other about it, because all of a sudden, like, we're kind of enforcing ourselves to speak in code. And I'd say, like, if I'm playing Guards of Atlantis, this game where you're like kind of doing combat in the middle, I might want my teammates to all go after the same opponent, but how can I tell them to do that without putting that person on notice that's like, oh, I need to run away or make a really defensive play here? So I just absolutely love that in those games and other kind of team games that have that limitation of just as long as the other team can hear you.
What about you, Pete?
Okay, so actually, just to go off Jake, my favorite version of team games with limited cooperation is Decrypto, because in Decrypto, you're giving clues to your team that your opponent's team can hear, and basically, if before you get to a certain point in the game, the opponents have figured out all of your code words, then you lose. So you're intentionally trying to give these obtuse clues. And so I just love the way Decrypto handles it, because you can just give the most obvious clues if you want in Decrypto, but you're going to lose the game. So playing a good game of Decrypto is using limited communication with your teammates who know the same information as you, just to stop other people from cracking your codes. So adore that.
And you can say as much as you want too, right? So it really, but with that one rule of the other team can hear you, it really like frees you up. It gets away from kind of like the so clover just one being like just one word. I could write a paragraph to my teammate if I wanted to. To crypto.
Anyway, so for a purely cooperative game, my favorite one that has a thematic and funny use of cooperation is a game called Decorum, which I've actually only played once. But in Decorum, you're trying to decorate a house together with your teammates. So we're collectively trying to decorate a house, and we each have certain things that we need the house to look like at the end, and certain things that it cannot look like at the end, but it's totally different for each of us. And so let's say I move a lamp into the bedroom, which is red. I then look at every player and they can either say, I love it, I'm okay with it, or I hate it. But you can't say why. You can't say which of your rules it is satisfying and breaking. So it is a game about passive aggression. And the only way you're allowed to communicate is passive aggressively. And so you can say, I hate it, but you can't say why you hate it. Even though you have a card that says, no, actually, for you, lamps have to be on the first floor or something like that, right? But like they have no idea if I need the lamp in a specific place or whatever. And by the time everyone says, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, you've beaten the game. And so it's just a hilarious thematic use of limited cooperation.
I that sounds one that would delight me. I need to play that one. Pete, did you have any others to mention before I jump into
No,
my top
go
three
for
real
it.
quick? No.
You do yours.
Because you have on your list here the Fellowship of the Ring crew.
I did. I
Which one
mentioned
do you
it
love? Yeah.
earlier, but
Okay.
yeah, and I will say I've absolutely loved the Fellowship of the Ring trick taking game, because the way that game works is everyone, sort of like the crew, where it's a trick taking game with very standard trick taking rules, but there's a cooperative element. In this, everyone is a character with a goal. And so your job is not just to complete your goal, but to make sure everyone has completed their goals. And they've intentionally built the scenarios in such a way that you have to really thread the needle with your trick taking to get everyone's goals completed.
Mhm.
And they give you a little bit of mitigation for passing cards because, of course, you never know what kind of hand you're going to get. But I think it's an absolutely masterful cooperative campaign game for anyone who wants to try. I might even suggest it over the crew if you are someone who cares at all about Lord of the Rings, because it really has all the things I love about the crew, but it adds a very engaging theme. So it's just excellent.
Yeah, I love that game too. For my list, a quick honorable mention to Smitten, which is so far the it's a 1 to 2 player cooperative game that we published, that I designed, where you are trying to complete 2 grids of cards, and whenever you play a card, it often has a rule that says the other player must now also place a card in the same grid or the opposite grid or a certain column in the grid. They have to follow a certain restriction based on the card that you played, and the whole game of Smitten almost is choosing choosing whose turn it is, essentially. And so I can't tell if I'm playing with Megan. I can't say, Megan, I'm going to play this specific card. I'm not allowed to say that. That's the limited information, limited communication. Rather, I can say, oh, Megan, I'd really like to take a turn right now, or I can't take a turn, or I don't want to take a turn. Decorum reminded me of this, Pete.
Yeah, I just want to say I love that element of Smitten. The idea that you can just say, I can play,
Mhm.
I want to play, I don't want to play. I love that that's the communication in that game.
Yeah, it took me a little bit to figure that out in that game, but it was neat once I stumbled upon it. The other quick examples here that I love are Just One, which you mentioned several times. The Gang, one of my recent favorites, cooperative poker game where the communication is very limited through the use of poker chips, where you're indicating how strong you think your hand is. So in this game, you really aren't talking all that much with the other players. You're communicating with these poker chips. I'm delighted by it every time I play it. And then the last one is Mysterium Park. It's a streamlined version of Mysterium, where it's one of these games where one player has a lot of information. They are the ghost. They have everything that they want to communicate to you, but the only way they can do so is by using these dreamlike illustrated cards. And everyone else at the table can talk completely freely about the clues that they've been given. That's one of the reasons I keep coming back to this game, because there is a lot of table talk happening at a table in Mysterium or Mysterium Park. It's just that one player who can't communicate, who has to communicate in a different way to those other players who are playing.
Yeah. Pete, your quick thoughts on Mysterium.
I haven't played Mysterium Park. The problem with Mysterium is it goes on for too long. So if Mysterium
Yeah.
Park solves that problem, I should play it.
It
Yeah.
does.
All right. So let's shift gears to the reason why I thought Jamey would be the perfect guest for this episode is that Jamey is at the end of a years-long path towards publishing a massive cooperative game. And Jake and I both have been a part of one playtest of Vantage, so we have a little bit of an idea of how it works. And I know you've done some preview videos. But the first question I want to ask you about Vantage, Jamey, is at what point in your conception of making this open world game did you decide you wanted it to be a cooperative game?
That's a good question. I think that was there from the very beginning. And the big inspiration for this is Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is not a cooperative game because it's a single player game. I think there was something about the exploration of that game that spoke to me and said, I want to play something like this, but with other players that are working together. Yeah.
And it does Vantage feature any form of limited communication? Tell us about that, kind of how that came about, and what you think that does for the game.
Yeah. The main hook of Vantage is that it is I guess the specs for it is a 1 to 6 player cooperative game set on a planet, and is the reason the game took so long is that it is an entire planet that I built with 3 different artists. And the main hook is that at the start of the game, all players are on a spaceship, and that spaceship crashes, and it sends the players on escape pods to vastly different parts of the planet. You start out the game separating the party, essentially, in D&D terms. And so the main hook advantage is that you are not together with other players, but you can talk to them. You have radio communication with other players. They just can't see what you see. Going back to this time stories example that I mentioned earlier. So the location that I'm looking at, I can describe it to you. I can even read the options on that card to you, but I can't show it to you. And so it's that, to me, that thematic and the mechanical implications that thematic hook has on it. Once I figured out that was what the game was about, it wasn't always that. That made me really, really excited to dig deep into the world.
Are there times in Vantage? So we played a prototype version of this game. I'm selfishly curious if it's had any big changes since then, or if that was kind of final or close to it. But
Yeah.
since we only got a snippet of it, right? We didn't get to play like a full session of it.
Yeah.
Are there times when like the party would converge on same areas, or like times when like the what I see is super important to Pete? Because we were just, just getting a taste. We were all over the place on this planet, without really a sense that like somebody was like around the next corner or whatever.
Yeah. So when we had this little playtest last year where we got our laptops out, because Vantage there are too many cards in the game for what I would call a normal playtest, the types of playtests we usually do, where we print out a bunch of cards, maybe we sleeve them and we play them. Vantage has too many cards for that. It has 1,300 cards. And so we had a playtesting app that we commissioned from a guy named Ira, who did a fantastic job with it. So we played that way, and it's that experience, while it is functional for a playtest, is not the full experience of Vantage, because in Vantage, even though you can't see my location, you can see my tableau of cards that I'm building. And that really facilitates a lot of the collaboration and communication and cooperation that goes into the game. When those are on different screens, it's really hard for you to see that I have a certain skill that I can help you with, things like that. But there are times where you can share a location. It's pretty rare. And I think the biggest part, and you're right, we kind of just dabbled in it a little bit in that playtest. The big element of Vantage in terms of information and communication that matters in the game, and in terms of what you're looking at, is your growing knowledge base of this planet. And so you might have an encounter with an animal on the planet that where you decide that your interaction with that planet or with that animal is that you want to try to capture it. You want to try to capture this animal. And later on, or somewhere else in the game, I might encounter an animal on my side of the planet, and your experience interacting with that animal and what you saw and what that animal looked like, that might help inform how I could interact with that animal. The decision is still mine as to how I choose to interact with that animal. Do I just look at it? Do I sneak around it? Do I take it? Do I attack it? But your experience and your knowledge from what you saw and what you decided to share with me about what you saw impacts my choices.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. And you can really see how, I mean, it just feels so theme forward, right? Like if we were living this and somebody sees a furry animal and something crazy happens, if I'm on the other side of the planet hearing that, like that would really be something I would want to consider with my interaction with a fuzzy animal or whatever. That makes
Well, it's
sense.
also making me think, if I've played the game several times, I might realize, oh, where Jake is, I've been there before when I've played it in the past. So that's kind of a thematic thing maybe as well, where I literally have information about where you are because I've been there.
Right. And that is contingent upon if you were there, and well, I was using, so if I was on that location and I described it well to you, or
Right.
now I'm describing it well, then you might make that connection. But if I didn't describe it well,
Exactly.
we're missing out on that connection and lose that advantage that you might have gained from having visited that location in the past.
To bring our conversation earlier about like kind of the fuzziness of this communication rule, as the designer, if I've realized without a doubt I had been in the place Pete is. I'd been like read those prompts on a previous session of this game.
Yeah.
Do you think, like, would it be your hope that players kind of keep that to themselves and, like, kind of have like a clear, like, they treat each session with like a clear slate, because like I, as my agency in this game, hadn't been there, it was Jake as a person that had been there? Or would
Right.
you want them to be like, oh, Pete, like, don't capture that animal, it's not going to work out for you?
Well, we haven't actually talked about this all that much today, but there is that element of the group dynamic and choosing how you interact with people based on the permission the game gives you. And so, in that respect, I do have a little mention in the rulebook where I say that I recommend that people are aware of what other players want them to share. Um, in addition to that, though, even though Pete may have visited that location in the past, you can only interact with each location in one way. So maybe Pete chose to capture that animal, or Jake, you were the one with the animal. You chose to capture that animal. You had that experience, but you don't know what the outcome would have been. Either the cost or the outcome would have been if you had chosen just to like sneak around that animal.
And
And
there's
so
like
you have a little
6
bit of
different things you could do, right? Is that right?
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So you have that one very specific experience, and you can share that. And I think in most cases, I suspect that people will be fine with you sharing that because you are not like listing 6 different things and their costs and their outcomes. That would take you a
Right.
long time to explore the world to that extent.
So I have a little bit of a basic question followed by a potentially difficult question. So my
Okay.
basic question is, what exactly are we cooperating to do in
Mhm.
Vantage? Like how are we cooperating, right? Like what are we doing together? And then
Yeah.
my more difficult question is, I know you've talked a lot about the game incentivizing intrinsic motivation and playing it how you want to play it, but is that at odds with it as a cooperative exercise if there are all these things that I want to do because I think they sound interesting?
Both really interesting questions there. The first one is a little bit easier, as you said.
Yeah.
The core goal of Vantage is to accomplish the shared mission of the group, why you came to this planet in the first place. And you randomize that at the beginning of the session. And we haven't said this, but Vantage is not a campaign game. You sit down, you play the game, you set it up, and then you clean it up, and you're done. It is only your knowledge of the world that carries from game to game. Um, but yeah, you have one of 21 different missions that you're trying to accomplish. Like maybe you came to this planet because you wanted to conquer it. That's one of the missions. Um, and so that is your core goal, but also you weren't expecting to crash land on this planet. And so one of the other goals that is considered a victory in the game is your destiny, your final destination. Like, do you repair your spaceship and fly off the planet? That might be an ending to the story that is also considered a victory. That segues into your other question, which is that a viable victory in Vantage is that you decide that something is really important to you or to the group and that you accomplish that goal. Um, and so there might be this game where Jake is playing. Jake has captured this animal and he's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that I could capture animals. I have this animal now. I want to capture a lot of animals. This is important to me, this game.
The
I'm having
Pokemon
fun doing
Master
it.
Trainer version of
Exactly.
Vantage.
Yeah. And Pete, I think you're right. Like Jake might be having fun doing that as his motivation for that game. He just decides to go deep into it. He's going to go search out animals and try to capture them, be surrounded by animals. Um, and I think this ties back to your question in that even though Jake is doing this thing that has nothing to do with conquering the planet, um, Jake's tableau of cards that he is creating all those cards are facilitating Jake's ability to survive on the planet and to do actions well, but also they're helping all of us do actions well in terms of our shared skills, our shared challenge dice slots. We don't have to go into fully what that means, but that is something that's a mechanism in the game. And our ability to not have our time, morale, or health reduced to zero, especially morale. If Jake's surrounded by animals, his morale is very high, and the group's morale might be high as a result.
That's so interesting. And it almost reminds me of sort of like playing a tabletop role playing game where it's pretty common when you play a tabletop role playing game, before you have your first session, you have something called a session zero. And the idea of a session zero in a role playing game is you kind of get together and decide, like, what do we want this game to be? What do we want our characters to be like? And it sort of makes sure that everyone's on the same page so that when you're actually playing the game, there's not that tension of, oh, I'm trying to play a goofy game, but Jake thought we were here to play a more serious game. So it almost feels like it would be helpful in a group advantage to kind of talk like, hey, how are we going to play this? Like, are we prioritizing that this is a cooperative game about achieving a goal, or are we playing in a sandbox together? Would you say that kind of, understanding everyone's motivations when you sit down to play Vantage is useful?
I think it is useful, but I think it often emerges while you're playing the game, not
Okay.
necessarily. It isn't probably something that you can discuss at the very beginning. Oftentimes, you will stumble upon something, and maybe it will excite you, maybe it won't, and that'll take you down a path that you weren't expecting in the game. Yeah. I appreciate your
But
curiosity about this game, guys. Yeah, thanks for talking about
Oh,
it.
I mean, I have not stopped thinking about this game since we play tested it. Like, I think that it is such a cool game because what's I think is interesting is a lot of the games we talked about in this episode are lighter games or at least
Mhm.
shorter games. I think that, or when it comes to the types of games that Vantage is, they're often campaign games where everyone is invested in some sort of long term story. And I also want to say that I think cooperative games are maybe better at telling a reliable story
Mhm.
than competitive games, but that's a whole other topic. But I think what's so cool about Vantage is that it is a big, meaty game that provides this unique cooperative element that I really do think that it's exciting, that it's doing something pretty different.
yeah, yeah, Jamie, thanks so much for coming on to talk about this game. Um, I feel similarly to Pete. I mean, I hope as a friend, I hope that this is a massive commercial success for you. I suspect that it might be kind of polarizing for folks because one thing I can assure listeners of my one playtest is like this game is not going to be like another game that you have on your shelf. Which to me, as somebody who owns a lot of games, that's like a very exciting prospect. I think that kind of like the choose your own adventure element of this, like I think there are people listening to this podcast right now, they're like intrinsic victory that does not appeal to me. Like I want to know what the rule is, but I think it will appeal to a lot of people that a lot of like the competitive Euro games that I already own will be a big miss with. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm just really excited to get my hands on this thing, and hopefully, the foreign policy of the country means that there won't be tremendous delays in getting my paws on it.
I hope so too. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Jake. I think for those who love perfect information in games, um, that Vantage is not that. Like Vantage is a game of discovery and exploration, it almost to the extreme, where the game really does not tell you what is on this planet. And I've kind of been careful about spoilers, maybe even too careful about spoilers about what's on this planet, because I want people to crash land on it and discover this stuff on their own and discover the outcome of all these actions. That is a core part of the experience, and I totally get for those who prefer those perfect information games. I certainly have. I love those games too, but I've had a blast designing and playing Vantage.
And I want to ask one final question that's going to tie Vantage into the discussion we've been having.
Mhm.
Because some players might decide that I want to play this game to where when you have a card, you should show everybody what's on your card because
Mm.
then, we're all seeing the world but you've put hidden and limited communication and information at the core of how you have to play Vantage. So what do you think that adds to the game? Why do you think that hidden information is so important to the cooperative experience in this game specifically?
The biggest thing I think it does is it gets people talking about what they're seeing, because you are looking. I don't know if I said this, but the location you're looking at is a first person perspective. You're not looking at it down from the bird's eye view. It is what your character is looking at in the world, and so it puts you in their shoes and has you actually just describe what you're looking at to the other players, and that facilitates discussion. And it facilitates the spreading of knowledge about the game. Um, I think it's actually one of my greater fears with the game, that people will just be like, oh, why don't we just put these on the table, these location cards, and everybody can just see it. But um, I think that's just such a core part of the idea that I'm not in the same place as you. I'm looking at something different than what you're looking at. And I guess the one place where the game does break from that immersion a little bit is the card tableau, which is on the table. So you can, and I want you to be able to see uh, what I have in my Tableau, because that facilitates the cooperation, the mechanical cooperation of the game. If you can't see that, it's pretty clunky, and that's what I think we experienced in the digital playtesting quite a bit, where you can't see that as easily. So the game gives up a little bit of the theme there, where you can see that for the benefit, I think, of the cooperative experience. But the location cards, I really hope people keep those secret for the sake of the theme and the mechanisms.
All right, well, Jamey's kind enough sent us some spoiler cards, so we'll be blasting those as the thumbnail of this YouTube video. No. Well, do we have, I think we should end it there. This has been an awesome discussion about cooperative games, about communication in games, and Vantage. Any final thoughts before we close out?
I think that for me, the biggest thing is like we've talked about, that part of the fun of these games is just feeling understood. And that is just a human goal. And I think that these games at their best can really highlight that in such a special way. And hopefully at their worst, at least give you an interesting human experience that you get some fun or value out of anyway.
That was essentially what I was going to say too. That because even though we started off talking about a problem that cooperative games present, this alpha player quarterbacking, to me, I think the design space has expanded so much within this format that it's the being able to sync with other people as a result and understand and hear and see and be seen. I think that is a huge asset of this category. And I'm glad that there's such a wide variety of games in this space now.
Awesome. Well, thanks both of you for being here for this wonderful conversation. Thanks so much to the listeners for joining in, and for those watching on YouTube. It has been a blast. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, we invite you to continue the conversation in our Discord. Love to hear your thoughts on limited communications, when they work, when they don't work, how you feel about that kind of fuzzy space of following the rules as written versus kind of what manifests in these games, and so much more. So there's a link in the description of this podcast to our Discord, and we hope you'll join us there for this conversation. And as always, we should thank Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out. Goodbye, y'all.
Bye.
Close enough, 'cause I am reaching out.